The fourth Noahide law concerns the prohibition of sexual immorality. In Jewish tradition, this law is not primarily understood as a detailed set of regulations, but as a fundamental safeguard of human dignity, trust, and stable relationships. In the Talmud and rabbinic tradition, this prohibition is especially associated with serious forms of sexual wrongdoing: incest, adultery, rape, and sexual exploitation. What these actions have in common is that they undermine the very relationships upon which society depends: family, trust between individuals, and the protection of the vulnerable. Rabbis have consistently emphasized that this law must be understood and lived out in practical life, not merely as an abstract moral principle. For this reason, the Noahide prohibition has been interpreted as a set of basic ethical boundaries, rather than a comprehensive sexual legal system such as halakha, which applies specifically to Jews. For non-Jews, the aim is to prevent actions that clearly harm others or destabilize social structures. A central concern in rabbinic thought has been the protection of the family. Adultery is regarded as a serious violation, not primarily for ritual reasons, but because it destroys trust, creates insecurity, and causes real harm to spouses and children. The family is understood as a foundational pillar of society, and this law serves to protect it. At the same time, rabbinic tradition is unequivocal that coercion and abuse of power render sexual acts morally unacceptable. Rape and sexual exploitation are treated not as private sins, but as grave offenses. Responsibility is always placed on the one who holds power, physical, social, or economic, never on the vulnerable party. It is also important to note that rabbis have not regarded sexuality itself as sinful or shameful. On the contrary, sexuality is described as a powerful and life-affirming force, but one that requires boundaries. The goal is not suppression or asceticism, but responsible stewardship. It is excess and exploitation that are condemned, not human desire itself. In practice, this has led to an emphasis on prevention rather than punishment. Rabbinic ethics has focused more on education, social structure, and clear moral norms than on sanctions after the fact. The Noahide laws are meant as guidance toward responsible relationships, not as instruments of control. Many people ask how homosexuality fits into the fourth Noahide law. Here, rabbinic tradition makes a clear distinction between the obligations that apply to Jews under halakha and the universal requirements that apply to Noahides. The Noahide laws do not address sexual orientation, but rather sexual actions that involve harm, coercion, exploitation, or the breakdown of fundamental social frameworks. For this reason, many rabbis have held that homosexual persons do not in themselves violate the Noahide laws, provided that relationships are characterized by consent, mutuality, and responsibility. At the same time, there are stricter rabbinic interpretations that include certain forms of homosexual practice among the prohibited acts for Noahides as well. These views are based on extended interpretations of biblical texts and have been the subject of internal debate within Jewish tradition. There is, therefore, no single, unanimous rabbinic position. What remains decisive, however, is that the Noahide laws are not used as tools for exclusion or demonization. Rabbinic thought consistently affirms the dignity of every human being as created in the image of God, and emphasizes ethical responsibility in relationships rather than moral surveillance of private lives. Rabbis have therefore stressed that the Noahide laws represent a universal ethical minimum, not an attempt to make the entire world Jewish. Different cultures may develop their own norms and practices, as long as basic boundaries of human dignity, consent, and protection of the vulnerable are respected. In our own time, this law remains deeply relevant. Questions of consent, abuse of power, human trafficking, and the sexual exploitation of children and vulnerable groups demonstrate the ongoing need for such fundamental ethical principles. Modern human rights thinking rests on the same core insight: sexuality must never be used to violate another person's freedom or dignity. The fourth Noahide law thus reminds us that a just society is built not only through laws and institutions, but also through ethical responsibility in the most intimate areas of human life. Where sexuality is guided by respect and boundaries, trust can grow, families can endure, and communities can flourish. Thank you for listening. If you have knowledge, insight, or corrections to add, you are warmly invited to share them in the comments. Thoughtful dialogue and mutual learning help deepen our understanding. May this reflection encourage respect, responsibility and compassion in our shared human life. Peace and blessings to you all.